It's the mid-90s, and you're actively looking for the next hottest game to play. Up to this point, you've been mainly a fan of the collection of Mario titles released so far, but what else is being released to compete? I heard that Sonic guy is making a bit of a name for himself with multiple releases already, and those Sony guys seem to be promoting some promising new adventures, but that's quite a bit of a leap. What about Nintendo's offerings? You had companies like Rare and Capcom providing many new experiences, but that was far from the entire Nintendo platformer scene up to this point. What about this silly pink blob? In 1992, players had their very first taste at a completely new world thanks to Kirby's Dream Land on the Game Boy, and with it selling over 5 million units when all was said and done, it was safe to say that this was the birth of a completely new series. Over the next couple years, it wouldn't just get another Game Boy release, but also on Nintendo's other systems at the time, the NES and Super Nintendo. With the latter being my main focus for today, I want to talk about debatably the most important and influential of all the games released on said platform, Kirby Super Star. Over the years, not only has the game been enjoyed enough to the point of getting a remake a decade later, but still has a community dedicated to exploring, routing, and trying to speedrun the game as fast as possible. A lot of people who have run the Kirby series enough have debated that this particular title may in fact be the most difficult of them all, with it notoriously being very RNG heavy and fast paced. Today, let's dive into the current fastest ever completion of Kirby Super Star and analyze why this run is as challenging as people say it is. So before I simply dive straight into the run itself, I want to talk about some different things, those being the basics of the game, the route that this world record run uses, and lastly some quick other notes to know before watching the gameplay. Instead of this being one consistent game start to finish, Kirby Super Star consists of 6 sub-games with various rules and goals, with there additionally being some other bonus game content like a boss endurance mode. Like any standard Kirby platformer title, the main things you need to know in order to play as Kirby is 1. Being able to swallow enemies, which grants you different abilities corresponding to what you swallowed, and 2. Being able to perform a type of hoverfly. With those 2 points being far from the only thing you can do, you can control Kirby in other ways like exhaling whatever is in Kirby's mouth, or being able to perform a slide. Getting the simplest of basics out of the way, let's get into more of the actual run. Today, we are going to be talking about the fastest completion category of the game, which happens to be any percent. The record in this while making this video is a 33:01 by Yotta, a person who over the previous 5 years has not only held onto this record, but has repeatedly beat it, not just a few times, but a total of 19 improvements now as of the beginning of 2024. Moving to what the route of this any percent record actually entails, let me simply state which sub-games are played, and then we can dive further in towards what each actually is. The route requires you to complete only 4 of the sub-games out of the starting list. This is not the same 4 that are unlocked from the very start, with Spring Breeze and Gourmet Race not being required to beat the game. This leaves the other 2 options which are required, Great Cave Offensive and Dynablade, with the first half of the route starting in this order. Following this, Revenge of Meta Knight is played, which requires Dynablade to be completed first, with the final sub-game, Milky Way Wishes, requiring not just Great Cave Offensive to be finished, but also Revenge of Meta Knight. Real quickly, if you're interested in more speedrun content similar to this, I recommend subscribing to the channel. But anyways, we got the route out of the way, so now it's time to get on to properly analyzing the run, level by level, and strategy by strategy. To start up a new run, players can either do a standard game reset or perform a soft reset within the game by pressing the button combination left, right, start, and select. It's important to note that all types of resetting were previously banned, with it not being lifted until November of 2022. There's different reasons why this may have been previously restricted, such as players possibly wanting to keep the integrity of this run being a consistent start-to-finish full playthrough. Entering the actual run, you may remember I said Great Cave Offensive is entered first, even though the required Dynablade is also available from the get-go. This is done for important reasons. The first relates to what is called a mix, which describes the function of Kirby being able to get a random copy ability after swallowing more than one enemy at once. This is activated by the player through a roulette wheel that pops up once swallowing the enemies. I'll get into this more in not too long once getting into the actual run. The second reason this subgame is done first is due to 2 repeating bosses in the game being RNG, Fatty Whale and Battle Windows. Just like the mix, I'll get back to this once we get to the appropriate point in the run. Immediately as the run starts, you have to skip tutorials entering the first subgame. When selecting no for the first tutorial, you are presented a second one, which is skipped with a buffered start input. Within the first minute of this run, you'll also be introduced to tons of minor optimizations that all add up. The first is the simple fact that Kirby runs at a faster horizontal speed while having something in its mouth. This is intertwined with another seemingly minor, but actually important piece of tech. By intentionally getting as close to an enemy as possible before inhaling it, you minimize how long Kirby is in this inhale state. The quicker an enemy can get into Kirby's mouth, the sooner you can continue to move again. Another instantly observable piece of tech is intentionally sliding off this edge, with it cutting off the end of said slide. Typically, sliding on its own is slower, but ledges can avoid the end of the slide that drags if timed well. Sprinkled between all of this tech is the important mix, with these two burn-on enemies being positioned in a way to swallow them at once. A roulette appears which spins between different possible abilities. If you're not familiar at all, this may seem like a random roll of the dice, but this roulette can actually be stopped. While it is challenging, with enough practice, you can actually get any desired ability at a consistent enough rate. In this case, the goal is the wheel. Collecting this ability leads to a plethora of even more movements you can take advantage of, such as a turn or pivot boost, where you get a quick speed boost when timing an opposite direction input. There is also summoning wheelie, which happens to be the fastest for horizontal speed, but has very poor mobility going up and down. Fortunately, this first subgame's layout works pretty well using this. Using this ability brings us to the first, and definitely not last, mini-boss in this game. If you blink, you may miss even seeing this first one, because you can instantly kill it thanks to being in a high jump state under said boss. This is achieved by footstooling off of a helper, which puts you in a state which can hurt enemies and instantly kill mini-bosses if you are underneath them. Grabbing the hammer from this mini-boss is very important for upcoming bosses. Getting back on wheelie, the level immediately presents multiple more ladders that require you to go up and down. This can be a bit annoying with wheelie due to needing to climb down slightly before going through them. Additionally, you can ladder bonk, which requires jumping into the one tile gap the ladder resides in. This allows you to go up as soon as possible. Double tapping the D-pad doesn't have any correlation with this trick. You don't need to do that in order for this to work. The double tap D-pad is just so that wheelie starts his wheel attack a bit quicker than if he wasn't dashing. Before approaching another boss, we can observe another piece of important movement knowledge that may be easily overlooked. Downward slopes carry momentum into the air, which is why they are abused in this room. When jumping with the wheelie, you will actually get hit in the air if you hold the B button, which means that when jumping, it's important to let go as soon as possible in order to avoid this damage. Don't ask why this happens, it simply just does. And now we get to what can be considered the first major choke point in regards to RNG, Fatty Whale. It can do one of two patterns. 1, the ball, which is what you ideally want, and 2, the flop, the less desirable outcome. Here in Yotta's record, he got the better one. Besides just the patterns, there are so many ways to kill Fatty Whale, with a comparison of different strategies being made. Yotta does the Shin plus Celebi pattern, which is named after Shin Kuribo, a fellow Kirby runner. A notable thing to mention doing this is the fact that the last hammer flip hit is only a 3-frame window. Conquering the boss, this follows with many more pieces of tech, mostly wheelie related. In the following room, you'll immediately see Yotta jump a lot, and this is because wheelie jumping results in giving a slight speed boost. He eventually hops off it, which makes the next water room possible to traverse. After getting through the water, Yotta immediately has to move downwards to progress forward, and can do this thanks to pressing down to go through platforms, with him moving right while falling here to lessen the amount of time Kirby will stand on the platform waiting to fall through it. Getting back to the wheelie, it is put in a jump higher mode. Wheelie will enter this if you jump while in a dash state and then press Y immediately after. This makes this jump up to the higher platform possible. This takes us towards the next boss on the list, Battle Windows. Each Windows boss here has a 25% chance of attacking first, with each of these costing between 3 and 12 seconds depending on what happens. The first is Slime, which he kills in one hit. This happens to be a 4-frame window. You can do this by using the wind up of Hammer Flip to do a bit of damage. Then the final blow is what finally finishes him off. This is thanks to having low enough health. Secondly is Puppet, which is taken care of with a hammer swing, which leads to the final enemy, Magician. With it needing 2 hits after a hammer swing, the best option here is using the back hitbox of the standard hammer move. While that may be the end of another boss, Great Cave Offensive is not over yet. Exiting the fight, the old towers section is skipped, with this not being required in any percent, which leads to a few more things before finishing the sub-game up. Dropping through some platforms with wheelie, Yotta intentionally shields and unshields, which allows you to drop through them faster. It saves even more time with Wheelie Rider in comparison to solo Kirby. Wheelie notably has a faster fall speed. Traversing through a handful of more rooms, Yotta approaches the final boss here, Wham Bam. The timing on this boss is key, as you want to start revving with Wheelie the moment the hand appears. If you do it too soon, you won't do as much damage, and if you do it too late, you will get hit and deal 0 damage. Yotta deals enough damage here to be able to kill Wham Bam with a hammer throw, with the hammer not being needed anymore. With the boss being defeated, it's time to leave. It ends with a section that can easily be cleared with Wheelie. Wheelie can jump in the air like any other helper in the game, and only gets a certain amount of full height jumps in the air, until eventually switching to shorter ones. Said jumps can be restored by bonking into a ceiling, which allows you to get out of this ditch using full height jumps. All that is left now is holding start to skip the ending cutscene. Instantly jumping into the next subgame, Dynablade, this can quickly be entered thanks to buffering the cursor and mashing to enter. Holding down B on the world map here, levels can immediately be entered. The first level immediately starts with another mix setup, with it this time being Jet. When airborne with Jet, you can be in 2 states, no dash or dash. When jumping from a dash, you're able to do semi-charged jets immediately, and when chained together are called jet strings. With a new ability, there's plenty of other important things to point out with it, such as ladders behaving in a weird fashion. Jetting towards them in a dash state will immediately put you on the ladder when holding up, with a lack of dash state not doing such. This tech is followed by what is called a red line, a real term referring to a jet going faster than its maximum safe speed. In this game, it refers to when you take the momentum of Jet and use it for horizontal speed. We can see this being used in the following room as well, leading to another quick mini-boss, Chef Kawasaki. Similar to the Bonkers fight in Great Cave, Kirby can enter a high jump state by using Jet, which instantly kills mini-bosses. This mini-boss can be killed very quickly, doing what is a very early corpse kill. Yotta just barely hits it while it is airborne. Beating this reveals the first, and very much not the last, goal game, which appears after clearing levels in this subgame. This can give you a wide range of prizes, but to simply get this over with for the speedrun, runners simply mash all 4 action buttons to immediately get shot out of the cannon. Entering the second stage, it immediately starts with a setup for the most broken thing in this run up to this point, setting up for a wall clip. The setup goes as follows. You first break the top block here with jet sparks, which gives you a hole to jet jump out of, and also reach a bomb block. After jumping, you summon Helper and go high enough that the CPU helper teleports to you. This CPU will only latch on the Kirby if he is floating downwards. Once latched on, start approaching the wall and face left while using the momentum to go inside. With Jet Helper's hitbox only facing in front of you, turning around allows you to enter the wall, allowing you to go out of bounds upwards to the door here. This clip is a bit of a history, with it originally only being thought to be possible with the ice and mirror helpers due to their hitboxes, but Jet Toast later found it was possible to clip with Jet 2. This led to a change in route using this discovery. The trick in its current fashion is known among runners as any partner clip. The next room after this re-grabs Jet from Helper. Moving backwards to grab it here may seem counterintuitive, but it allows you to swallow Jet faster. Additionally, you can jump out of a dash to start up Jet strings immediately. This level has yet another notable skip, this time completely avoiding a mini-boss. While breaking this wall with Jet fumes, you can charge and go off the screen. If you are not in the bounds of the screen, the boss won't even spawn. Entering the third stage, it features multiple more red lines, with the tight spacing making this beginning difficult. Eventually, you run into a room where you're forced to run down sloped hallways, and due to the downward slopes, Jet Kick is the better choice over Jet Charge, with the former sending you forward instead of downwards. Reaching the end of the room, Yotta has to break this bomb block, and before they break, he slides off the blocks so he can get closer to the door while charging Jet. With this over, it's back to some more redlining and some really quick mashing up to a ladder. Jumping into the 4th level, Yotta early on opts to pick going to the right over the left in this room, with redlining being so overpowered. Getting to the top of said room, it ends with him using Jet into the feather projectile so that he doesn't get hit by it, and has a neat setup for the bomb block break. Following this with a very short room, this leads to perhaps the worst room in the game, the Tack Room, named after the enemy of the same name, which appears a bunch here. Using a few red lines to help get past this, the last one performed is pretty tricky due to the room lagging a bit, as well as the factor of lava being under the breakable block. This leads to the final stretch of this level, with it starting off in a room with 3 mini-bosses. All of them are skipped, with Yotta going off screen once again. All that is notably left in Dynablade is, well, defeating Dynablade. Grabbing these stars here are notably difficult, with their jank hitboxes requiring you to position in a specific spot. Yotta sadly barely missed a major time save, which is RNG reliant. This creates crazy head spring attack is one of the many possible attacks, with this specific one allowing for a one-off kill. Yotta gets the RNG, but misses the final hit of the star by a few frames. With that not happening, the boss requires slightly more work to be defeated, with Yotta then finally resetting to skip a cutscene. We are now far enough into the run to dive into the first subgame where RNG manipulation is relevant, Revenge of Meta Knight. Here's some general information about manipulating RNG in this game. When the game is reset or first started, RNG will start at the hex value 7777, or 119 if you want to put it in decimal. This value is always consistent, so if you play perfectly after this point, you will always get the same exact RNG. When booting up the game, you are greeted with the Kirby Super Star logo before file select, and once this appears, RNG advances every single frame as long as you stay on the screen. But there is a solution to this. By buffering inputs, you can skip this screen immediately on the first possible frame, which leads to consistent RNG. With RNG being advanced by a ton of things in this game, it is ultra important to play consistently in order to keep the desirable RNG. The most notable things that advance RNG include dash clouds, landing stars, and enemy actions as they spawn on screen. With that, let's get into the actual subgame. Booting up the game, it immediately starts off with some dialogue text scrolling. This can conveniently be buffered with Y or B. Getting past the first wave of text, it's time to immediately once again focus on another mix. Typically a jet mix would be a runner's immediate choice, but Yotta is going for an over-the-top 2-second time save, which aims to skip a cutscene for the upcoming Heavy Lobster boss. For the mix, he is planning to get Crash, but for faster movement, he is going to wait to activate such till the end of the room. This is due to Crash not having any mobility benefit. Keeping proper RNG through this part of the run is insanely difficult as you can't accidentally bump into walls or get hit by anything. This requires perfect gameplay. This leads to the Heavy Lobster cutscene skip, and let me explain why this even happens. For this particular cutscene, the game runs the specific routine. Does Kirby have Crash? Is Kirby currently performing a Y action? If both are true, skip the cutscene. Developers oddly intended for this cutscene to be skipped with Crash by using the Crash ability that destroys everything on screen. Doing this on its own would not save time, due to how slow the Crash cutscene is. The huge oversight is that the Y button press could be for any action, not just the Crash ability. Kirby puffing in the air is considered a Y button action, which translates to both of these conditions being met. There's also another notable piece to this puzzle though. Kirby still has Crash, and this game does not have the option to discard abilities that are obtained. The only way to get rid of Crash here is by either using the ability or getting it popped by an enemy. With the latter not involving a long cutscene, this is the best course of action. So with RNG manipulation in this cutscene, Yotta floats up in the air and puffs right before getting hit by the lobster. This consistently rolls a 1 out of 8 chance of the ability popping. Can I remind you that everything I just described to you only saves 2 seconds? Having no ability now, this leads to another mix setup, the final one in the run actually. Keeping the right RNG in place, he does an extra dash on his way to the 2 enemies needed in order to manipulate them. With Jet acquired once again, not too long after is another mini-boss skip, and does this by bonking against this wall to gain enough height to prevent the boss trigger. In a water section following this, Yotta also starts charging his Jet here, which is stored for when he gets to the door a few seconds later. Getting plopped into an auto-scroller, there's nothing notable time save wise, but there is some showing off that can be done here. Jet has a unique property where if you are above the screen and start hovering, the game will immediately snap you to the screen bounce. Abusing this, you go above an area during the auto-scroller and hover, making Kirby go inside the wall. This is followed by another cool jump that happens due to jumping and immediately landing on a floor above you. It takes all your jump momentum and flings Kirby high up into the air with the help of moving left or right. Once his auto-scrolling is over, it's time to fight another boss, Wispy Woods. This fight is pretty straightforward, with each kick dealing a different amount of damage. Doing a Y-tap kick will deal more damage over more hits. In comparison, a charge Y kick will do 1 large blow of damage, which is useful for the end of the fight. With that boss over, sorry, a bit of a tickle in my throat. The next stage begins with a required movement, jumping over this tiny hill to get just enough height to safely get past enemies, and then has to climb up platforms. As he does this, Yotta charges Jet so he can eventually jet jump for additional height. This leads towards the not just single, but double bonkers mini boss fight. Normally they can be killed instantly with a jet jump, but because 2 of them spawn at the same time, a change in strategy is needed to kill the second one fast enough. The first of the the two is killed quite quickly, using a setup that destroys the corpse as it is falling down. In regards to the second one, you want it to jump. Bonkers has 3 attacks, with 2 of them that jump. This means a jump is a 2 out of 3 chance, and it's also a 1 out of 3 chance for an easier jump pattern. Yotta got the easier one here, but unfortunately he didn't charge Jet enough to do the jump, so he ends up missing, and has to finish things off with standard attacks. This is instantly followed up with some more movement between small gaps, most notably in the next room where the ceiling gap allows you to skip the majority of this section. The movement following this is tricky, with the sword enemies having a lot of health, which means they won't just simply die using jet attacks. This room enters into another which features cannons that can be lit up with jet fumes. Getting through a section featuring Dynablade, this room in particular lags a ton due to background particle effects and Dynablade sprite. Skipping 2 mini-bosses, Yotta clips back in bounds, and enters an elevator room. What's interesting here is that the fastest way to utilize elevators more often than not is by riding on top of them. This is because they will automatically move if Kirby is above or below them. Yotta lowers the first elevator by going under it, and then also goes to the right to lower a second elevator above, and does this before even stepping onto the first one. He does a precise jet jump to get on top of the second, and then jet jumps over to the top of the third elevator. This room ends with one last full jet charge, and since this room has a lot of sprites, he additionally reduces lag by making sure the jet charge fumes hit the right wall while charging up. This puts you right into another double mini-boss. Doing this fast requires quick killing the first one, which is followed by using the corpse to instantly kill the second. This is very challenging, and this second corpse is killed by kicking it once and then jetting into it to destroy it. This makes Kirby bonk off the wall to gain enough height to continue jet stringing towards the door. Between boss fights, you can also observe that when Kirby is jetting in dash state, his hitbox seemingly becomes immune to certain things, with him visibly going through statues here. This takes us right into the combo cannon fight, which has a pretty cool setup. Kirby first full charge jets into the base of it to do some damage to the main cannon. Invincibility frames after this jet attack just barely allows you to jump through this laser cannon, which puts Kirby on the platform. After you grab the bomb, it drops to finally destroy the cannon. With that, it's time for another stage, and this first room lags really bad. Most runners mash Y here to get jets out as fast as possible due to this, with there not being a consistent timing thanks to the lag. This lag can be attributed to particle effects once again, but also thanks to text scrolling during gameplay. Finishing out this room, you have to grab a warp star, and the timing Yotta does here is really impressive. This is because just like the statues he was able to breeze through earlier, you can also do this with warp stars if you don't time jetting properly. Most runners hover in the air to get out of a dash state to guarantee grabbing this, but Yotta here refuses to leave dash state. Breaking these bomb blocks in the fastest way thanks to jet sparks, we stumble into another mini-boss that also has a skip, but this one is a bit more unique. This is due to there being no easy way to jet jump into jet strings in dash state, and there is also a ceiling above you. Ultimately, the fastest way to get over this boss is to charge individual jet attacks over it, which is difficult to do in an efficient manner. With another auto-scroller, the best way to save time here is to avoid anything that can lag the game, most notably because of text scrolling once again. A ton of this ending heavy lobster fight will just consist of shielding inside it, so there are minimized chances to cause lag. Heavy lobster can do 4 different patterns at the start of the fight, with top runners practicing all 4 of them to perfect this fight. Yotta got the fastest pattern here, but the time difference between patterns is very minimal. You may notice leaving this fight that his ability is gone, with Yotta summoning a helper at just the right time during screen transitions. This doesn't properly spawn a helper, and is useful with Jet not being needed going forward. This saves a second and a half over properly summoning such. In the 6th stage, we get to see a new copy ability to be introduced, Plasma. Some things to know about Plasma is, charging it requires pressing inputs on the D-pad, with a full Plasma charge taking 16 D-pad inputs. Full charge Plasma also provides Kirby a small shield, which can be useful. Most runners use a technique named the diagonal method, which is to bring your thumb between 2 diagonal inputs on the D-pad and pressing 2 inputs per thumb movement. On screen are a couple pretty clear examples of such. There's more about Plasma I will talk about once it's more relevant in the run. Until then, there are immediately some things that change thanks to Plasma, such as hitting the switch with the Plasma attack, which allows for the door to go up sooner, and switches are also able to be activated thanks to a full charge Plasma, which notably has back sparks which shoot diagonally away. This one here notably can't be hit without using back sparks, and saves time having to go down the elevator to the right, simply hitting the switch through the wall instead. This leads us into a boss fight once again, with this one, Halberd's Reactor, having quite a lot of information to unravel. Sit down, because this is hefty. Calling it Reactor for short, this unique boss only takes damage by using its own turret shots to shoot its crystal, requiring 3 shots to ultimately kill. Yotta starts going crazy with plasma immediately because he is trying to kill the cannon in front of it. He does this because it saves time to have it destroyed if it opts to shoot later on in the fight. Instead of charging up a cannon shot, Reactor will just skip the phase entirely and summon another turret. It can either shoot out of this cannon or send out either 1 or 3 flamethrowers inside the ground. It is RNG if a turret will immediately be sent out in the first place. This fight also goes back and forth between cannon shots or flamethrowers, then sending out a turret. There are actually 2 types of turrets, ones that will aim at Kirby from an angle and ones that do so at Kirby horizontally. There's also some more RNG, with horizontal ones being slightly faster, and if there wasn't enough randomness, turret positions are yet another RNG element here. Yotta destroys the turret as soon as it is done shooting due to cancelling waiting for the turret to go back off screen. Killing it instantly moves onto the next attack. And also while taking out the turret, Yotta uses the back sparks to damage the cannon simultaneously. The cannon has a chance after every turret to shoot, and in this run, it goes off the first chance it gets. The first shot is unavoidable as it is impossible to kill this cannon fast enough. This is undesirable, having to wait for the cannon to shoot. By the third turret, Yotta stops shooting at the cannon, as it never ends up shooting by this point and instead sends out a single flamethrower that is completely destroyed. You barely even end up seeing it. With it being only a single flamethrower, the time it took to deal with this was extremely minimal. Alright, are you still there? Because I know that boss was quite hefty, but there is still one last section to this subgame. This begins with another lengthy autoscroller, and of course we have our best friend, laggy scrolling text. Most notably here, Yotta intentionally delays his plasma shot, waiting till Meta Knight's text is done to prevent lag. Before the final fight, he also does a precise elevator clip by floating into the corner, and in this upcoming section goes for what is dubbed right side, which is quickly floating to the right of this fight to quickly kill all of the Meta Knights. Shooting 3 plasma shots allows immediate kills among all the enemies as they spawn in. This finally leads into the very last section, the ending Meta Knight fight. Yotta summons a plasma helper to grab sword, and then discard it. He swaps it for helper, which kills him quite quickly. This fight is technically faster using sword, with a comparison also being shown here, but it is very difficult. It was originally not deemed to be possible for real-time runs, and it's hard to say what the future of this will be in runs. With that, this ends with a straightforward escape sequence that utilizes downward slopes for speed, and now it's on to the final leg of the game. The last, but not the least, Milky Way Wishes is the final subgame completed to conquer any percent, and is the most unique by far, because you do not obtain abilities in any traditional sense. Inhaling like before will not give you an ability this time, and you have to instead collect Copy Essence Deluxe statues, which grant you that ability forever, and also can be selected at any time. The stakes in the subgame aren't as high, and losing an ability isn't lethal as you can immediately grab it again. This doesn't mean the entire section is easy though. The name of the game for this subgame is Deciding the Order of the Planets, which has been heavily routed. Half Moon, which is the RNG heavy level, is sadly the most optimal when played as the last planet, which leads to it being at the very end of the run. Yotta immediately goes to Sky High due to it having Jet, with that being basically mandatory to grab first if you want to be in the game of going fast. This block inhale at the beginning of this planet is difficult to time correctly, requiring not just a mid-air swallow, but also needing to be left of this one tile gap due to the wind pushing you forward. Yotta achieves this by letting go of the D-pad, which stops his dash, then jumps and inhales immediately. After inhaling this, he immediately presses A to swallow it and hovers up to the door, with Jet being located here. Not too long after, this is followed up by beating the boss Krakow, and Yotta resets the game once it fades to black. Once this fade happens, the game considers the stage beaten, and resetting the game is actually faster than watching the ending cutscene. This is something that will be repeated. Entering the next planet, Hotbeat, we can observe some similar Jet-related tech, such as Yotta dashing off this lava block to start Jet stringing to the very end of this hallway. Going upwards, you eventually cross paths with a Waddle Doo, which can be very annoying. If you get bad RNG, it blocks off the entire hallway with a beam attack, and you are forced to hit it, which unfortunately, Yotta has to deal with here. You will also notice that invincibility candies are handed out quite often in Milky Way Wishes, with it doubling your speed running on the ground. So anytime there is one right in the middle of the path, it's worth grabbing it. While doing this here, you'll also see Yotta start charging his jet while descending, which is stored for a second fall where it is finally fully charged. The final room of this stage has a couple of notable pieces of tech. The first being intentionally bonking against this lava block to gain additional height while in the dash state, and the second is skipping these cannons and falling directly into into this hole. This one may look tricky, but it is pretty easy when doing these 4 jets that Yotta did. Those tricks walk us into the next boss, Chameleon Arm Fight. The main thing to note here is that similar to Heavy Lobster, this boss also has multiple patterns, but rather than 4, this one only has 2. In the third planet, Mekai, there's notably a point at the end where routes start to deviate depending on the runner's skill level. The recommended strategy to start with is to take the elevator all the way up and go left. This is to collect plasma, which makes the final boss fight easier. This takes about 12 seconds though, with it requiring you to defeat another mini-boss. In Yotta's case, he simply goes right into the final fight here. Planet 4, Cavios, is pretty tough. You have to kill 4 mini-bosses in this one room, and while it is pretty straightforward, it is very easy to mess up here on a run with such high stakes. First, Yotta quickly kills Chef Kawasaki here, and then while descending, does some damage to the corpse using jet fumes before finally jumping into it to destroy it. This allows him to move upward out of this arena, while simultaneously killing the corpse. This is followed by a hallway that can be tricky to traverse, with it requiring very precise spacing to get through while staying in the air and not bonking. Ninja enemy RNG can also potentially mess things up. Entering another mini-boss, Hammer is grabbed here, and is the final power-up to mention for Milky Way Wishes. This power-up is essential for many upcoming boss fights. And speaking of boss fights, here's another, Wham Bam. This fight with a hammer requires you to stand in a very precise position in order for things to go properly, preferably this specific foot and tile position. This fight is difficult to properly time due to how frustratingly small Hammer's hitboxes are, and when Yotta does hammer throw, this timing is precise as well due to iframes behaving strangely. If thrown at the wrong time, it won't deal enough damage to kill Wham Bam. With that, it's time to move to Aqualus. And here, it's interesting to note that water behaves oddly when obtaining abilities inside it. When swapping abilities, Kirby re-enters the water. This makes him stationary while the animation plays out, but being on the floor makes the animation end. So here, Yotta can swim up to the door as soon as he gets jet. Traversing through more water here, spacing is key because this Knuckle Joe has so much health that it takes 2 kills to attack it. Trying to go through it without killing it will lead to you taking damage, so the best solution is to kill it. There is also dealing with the one at the bottom of the room too. Before this room ends, Yotta also intentionally clips into the corner of this air pocket, getting a vertical speed boost. This stage ends with our friend Fatty Whale once again, and similar to before, this is an RNG heavy fight. Unfortunately, Yotta got a bad pattern here, but still, the run continues. It's now time for the second to last planet here, Floria. The gimmick here is that you can change the season of the level by going through doors, causing a terrain change. This is the reason for entering a ton of doors during this stage. Overall, this is a pretty easy and short stage in comparison to others, with it being intended to be the very first of the subgame. This level ends with some more tree-related action, which is pretty much the same deal as earlier in the run. Upon resetting the game once again, this is where the true juiciness of RNG manipulation begins. This stems from battle windows being so deep into this next stage, and there are several points in the level that advance RNG every single frame. Yotta here will use a calculator to find his RNG point once he arrives at the boss fight, which we will get to very soon. Before the boss fight, there's a few more things. Firstly, these minecarts can go faster when mashing Y, and then immediately after, you'll see there's a warp star that when taken, brings you directly to the upcoming mini-boss. While this may seem like the straightforward thing to grab, it's surprisingly faster to skip the star and instead progress forward with Jet. This mini-boss is yet another double one. The first call is to kill AidanMse because it has no attacks where it jumps. Chef Kawasaki is next on the chopping block, with it having a chance of jumping. If he jumps, he can be killed immediately, and if not, is killed with standard jet attacks. One final thing achieved here before the ending is what is called an Aqua Boost. If you enter the water while pressing Y, you can boost yourself upward, and if you press this frame perfectly, you will also get a huge horizontal boost. We are now where the RNG manipulation comes into play. Yotta jumps and lands 3 times here. He needs to pay detailed attention to the direction the stars go when Kirby lands, as he then inputs these values into the calculator using keyboard numpad controls. While this calculator seemingly tells you what to do based on your inputs, there is one very critical flaw in this tool. If there are multiple instances that can occur under the inputted star combination within the range you provided, you aren't able to view every single other instance, only the first one. Here, Magician is shown to have a ninja ability, but Yotta actually got Fighter instead. He immediately knew the manipulation didn't work and gave up, and immediately started attacking Dark Knight here instead of waiting for it to hit the ground, which is what you would do if doing the manipulation. This was unfortunate to miss, but the great thing is that the game was nice enough to give him good RNG anyway. With this happening, this calculator has since been updated, and you can now view all possible scenarios using arrow keys to navigate. Already having the power to go through all of that, the run still isn't over yet, with there being one final stage to conquer, the Heart of Nova. This is the beginning of yet another RNG manipulation, and fortunately, this time is purely gameplay based instead of using a calculator. With the auto-scroller and fight being simple enough to do consistently, it's possible to keep your RNG consistent enough throughout the entire thing, up until the final Marks fight. The manipulation here mostly comes down to, kill these enemies, but don't kill these others. Once getting up to the actual boss fight, RNG stays mostly consistent, but it sometimes can be off by 1 or 2 numbers and can be accounted for at the end of the fight. When defeating Nova here, runners need to pay attention to these explosion clouds extremely carefully. This basically is what tells us what RNG number we are on getting into this fight. While Yotta's first actions may seem random, these notes can be used to tell you what to do entering the Marks fight. The fight here is a lot different when doing the manipulation over doing it normally with Jet. This stems from the actions taken needing to be done at consistent times, and doing it the normal way will cause varying RNG. After doing Jet attacks in the final phase, RNG manipulation helps knowing where Marks will teleport, and with a quick hammer switch, Yotta finishes this boss off, resulting in the very end of the 80% speedrun, and for Yotta here was a roughly 7-second record, a 33:01. So that about covers the entire run, but of course with a game as complex as this, it's far from being over. Yotta's sum of best shows a 32-minute time is more than possible, and eventually can definitely happen whether him or someone else wants to do such. With a run that is already tightly optimized, obviously not every tiny minor time save that is discovered will be added in, but there are definitely a handful of examples to point out. For example, in the planet Cavios, there's a couple examples of optimizations, but if you want a more realistic example of what may get added, there's this elevator section in Revenge of Meta Knight that allows you to make the elevator go up faster. And of course, there's also some more unrealistic things to do here too, such as this quick movement that is really difficult to do thanks to lag. Besides adding in new time saves, there's other things that can be improved upon that were already mentioned, such as better Fatty Whale RNG. While obviously it is hard to predict the future, Yotta has consistently held this record for over 4 years as of making this, so it's safe to say that his times aren't going anywhere anytime soon. With his first record being in 2019, he has since improved this time by well over a minute over the years. On top of this, he really hasn't had the fiercest of competition. If we enable obsolete runs, look at how many top times Yotta has had out of the top 20 here. It's safe to say that no matter what, Yotta for quite a while has been the king of this game, holding onto the 100% record for an equal length of time. With such a complex set of routing, movement, tech, and RNG, this game is a huge skill requirement for pumping out top runs, and it's definitely not for the faint of heart. With this being one of the hardest Kirby titles to optimize at a high level, runners like Yotta are able to prove how insane it can get. And of course, that's not the only person I want to talk about in this game. I specifically want to thank Nippo, who not only has put so much work into this game, having a top 10 time, but helped me with scripting this entire video. This project would have been a million times harder without the help of someone with such extensive knowledge in speedrunning this game. Remember the calculator I brought up for RNG manipulation? You can thank Nippo for that as well. With that, that was a deep dive into beating Kirby Super Star as fast as possible. And with that, thanks for watching.